this morning, and welcome to everyone. Hopefully in the near future we can get together in person. Having just gotten my second vaccine, I'm really looking forward to it. Really want to thank Washington Space Business Roundtable for getting us together. You know, at Virgin Orbit, we're in the business of opening space for everyone, from the commercial sector to national security to NASA and all the science missions that are needed and being undertaken. But this year was a special year for us because we opened up the year crossing the chasm from being an aspirational space company to becoming an operational space company. When in January 17th, we took 10 beautiful, innovative satellites for NASA from a runway in Mojave, California, up into Earth orbit so that they could start to do their mission. It was an incredible day. And before we get into the rest of the program, I'd just like to play this short video so you can have a taste of what that day was like.
LC, this is LD in control. We are currently on track for our nominal timeline, and our current drop time as listed in Trillion is 19:25 UTC.
Plane controller and flight crew has been boarded the aircraft.
Cosmic Girl, this is Orbit Base. You are go for takeoff.
Copy, go for takeoff.
Altitude 3000.
And Orbit Base, Cosmic Girl is starting the turn to the inbound. Pulling now. Pull.
Pulling.
Release. Release, release, release.
Radius is ignited.
Confirm Newton 3 engine startup.
TVC's in first stage looking good.
Max Alpha achieved.
We had a pretty awesome view up here.
Max Q Alpha achieved.
Big one burn nominal.
Stage set, brake wires broken.
Newton 4 startup complete.
Recovered, and we are now returning to base.
Bearing brake wires broken.
Launcher 1's in space.
Sounds like the blue skies went to black.
This is Radiohead on control. Mauritius has confirmed acquisition signal. Payload separation confirmed.
So that's a little taste of what we experienced in January. We are now ripping forward. Our next rocket will ship to the launch site in a few days, and we are really eager to get going and have some really exciting missions ahead of us, and really look forward to supporting NASA and all of their science objectives, as well as the commercial and the national security customers internationally and in the United States. And that's why I'm so excited this morning to introduce Congressman Beyer. He's a businessman, a former lieutenant governor, a former ambassador. Congressman Beyer has dealt with issues from teen pregnancy to nuclear proliferation. An incredible career of leadership on the most important issues that face us domestically and frankly to humankind. He's chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, serves on the Ways and Means Committee, and is currently chairman of the Space Subcommittee. Congressman, you have supported NASA in important space missions, especially Earth science, the understanding of climate change, as well as leading us forward in making sure that NASA is supporting the most important aspirations of frankly, our species. You've been a great supporter of the commercial sector and balancing what we can do commercially and what government needs to take on and how we work together in the most effective ways. Your background is why we are so excited across the community about your appointment to be chair of the Space Subcommittee. Congressman, we at Virgin Orbit are here to support you. Thank you for your leadership over the years, and we're really excited to see what is coming up next. Congressman Don Beyer, over to you, sir.
Dan, thank you very much. And that was a very cool video. I'm so excited. I'll be talking to my children about when the blue skies go to black. Very, very much fun. And I'm so excited to be with you. And I'm really excited to be chairing the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, which was not something I ever expected. And I do come before you humbly because I realize that I'm talking to a bunch of people who do space day in and day out. I like to think I'm the only certified automobile mechanic in Congress, but I'm not a space expert. However, I did consume like 1,000 science fiction novels as a child, and I remain a confirmed physics nerd. I think only Dr. Bill Foster, who's our only PhD physicist in Congress, and I are the only two members of Congress who might be brave enough to try to explain special relativity to any of our other fellow members of Congress. I actually lived in Bern, Switzerland for 4 years. I was ambassador. So it was just a few blocks from that apartment, that small apartment where Albert Einstein wrote the landmark papers of 1905, Brownian motion, the quantum theory of light, the photoelectric effect, the equivalence of mass and energy, and of course, special relativity. I had many, many cups of coffee in the Einstein Cafe just below. And in 2021, we have incredible work to do to sustain the United States' leadership in space, a strong NASA going forward, and especially to enable an innovative, competitive, and cutting-edge commercial space industry. I've been friends with David Thompson, who founded Orbital 30-some years ago, right out of MIT. And so sort of up close have been able to see this in office and out of office. So I just want to make 3 points today. The first is that more and more and more, what happens in outer space is inextricably connected to our everyday lives. Space is not only the next frontier of discovery, it's actually today the crucial enabler of our day-to-day lives. It's key for national security, economic strength, for geopolitical relationships, for our global competitive standing, and especially for our national research and innovation enterprise. For example, take weather and the importance of our nation's weather satellites. NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information reported there were 22 separate billion-dollar storms just in the US last year in 2020. And those cost us about $95 billion. So timely, reliable operational weather data and imagery is essential for providing the forecasts and warning of those storms. And our space-based weather satellites collect real-time imagery of clouds and storms, data on water vapor in the atmosphere, and other imagery and data that are essential to predicting weather and preventing severe weather losses, lives, property, things like that. NOAA is also purchasing data such as radio occultation data from commercial satellite providers to supplement its own space-based weather forecast. So you have the private sector and the public sector working together essentially. And obviously, it's not just terrestrial weather, because their space weather predictions are important for forecasts about the risks of solar activities, solar flares or geomagnetic storms from the sun that can lead to widespread blackouts, loss of telecommunications, effects on transportation, and all the things on GPS signals for precision location activities. I mean, so much of our lives right now is based on interaction between us, our telecommunications systems here, and the satellites. And obviously the space weather can also pose radiation risks to our astronauts living and working in space. And I was thrilled that SpaceX safely delivered 4 astronauts up to ISS this past week. And the potential economic and societal impact of a severe weather effect could be devastating. Last year, Congress passed and President Trump signed into law, the Pro-SWIFT Act to sustain space weather observations and improve our ability to predict space weather. But space also contributes to addressing global societal challenges. So mass, autonomy, safety, operations. Think of driving a rover or flying a helicopter on Mars millions of miles away, or just updating its software over a couple of days, or supporting multiple astronauts 24/7, year after year after year, orbiting a spacecraft overhead. And because of its expertise, NASA is often called upon meeting challenges. Think back to 2010 when NASA aided the sustainment and rescue of 33 Chilean miners who were trapped for over 2 months following the collapse of a gold and copper mine. And events such as the Chilean miner rescue are discrete. Yet for societal challenges as climate change, NASA is working on a day-to-day, decade level to provide the measurements and research on the Earth's systems and climate. NASA Earth is the science program is the only agency that systematically measured the Earth from space for decades, looking at ocean systems, land systems, climate, cryosphere, atmosphere, biosphere, measuring the changes over time. Ellen Stofan is a good friend who is NASA's chief climate scientist, as you all know her, I'm sure, who famously said a couple of years ago that NASA has the responsibility to study the planets. And the most important planet for it to study is the one that we live on. And we would know so much less about the impact of climate change without NASA providing the essential measurements. It operates 24 Earth science spacecraft, another half-dozen Earth science instruments on the ISS. There's climate sensors on NOAA's weather satellites. And because of this long-term data, NASA's Earth observations data provided important contributions to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report. So all these things that we worry about, drought, fires, water resource availability, air quality, sea level rise, coastal flooding, heat waves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're dependent on NASA and NASA's Earth science to be able to go forward. But then it's not only technologies and data to help our society, it's also our ability to work across cultures and nations to develop these collaborative relationships that focus on peaceful discoveries and exploration. You obviously know how tense our relationship is with Russia right now. Their interference in our elections, just messing with lots of people on a lot of bad things. And yet, the one place we seem to get along is in space. It's been a unifying agent, and that international partnership is held together through decades of geopolitical tension, especially with Russia. You have all read The Martian. I'm sure Andy Weir's first book is a new one out yet, which I've ordered but not read. It was very cool at the end of The Martian when it was the Chinese who stepped in to help save that one person landed there. That's not happening in the short run with China. We have so many other big issues on the forced labor in the concentration camps with the Uyghurs, or the future of Taiwan, or the repression in Hong Kong. But we also have to recognize they're a major player in space, and someday in the future, the opportunity to work together with them for the benefit of all mankind is something we have to cling to. Almost every NASA science mission involves international partners. The Artemis Moon to Mars effort is going to have international partners, and as we really push the boundaries of human exploration. And these relationships strengthen our diplomacy on Earth too. When we can work together with, say, many of our European partners, or French Guiana when we launched the James Webb Telescope. All these partnerships are essential in ensuring the safety and sustainability of the space environment. NASA also established the Artemis Accords. These are the principles of responsible behavior for its bilateral partnerships with other nations seeking to work on the Artemis program. There's a lot more work to be done, thinking about asteroids and safe places on the moon and a lot of stuff, but its diplomacy is going to be just as important for our work in space as it is here. And with more satellites and mega constellations being launched, there's a growing need to focus on safety, which again has to be done internationally. We're not the only ones launching satellites. Space situational awareness is a priority issue for this subcommittee, and we're going to be talking about that. And finally, space activities, exploration, discovery are exciting. It's no longer a small club. just the US and Russia or the USSR in the past. It's this growing sphere of activity with an increasing number of nations, universities, commercial entities. I had dinner last night with the Swiss ambassador, Jacques Bidelou, and the first thing he brought up was all the things that little Switzerland, which has no launch pad, is doing in space. And the small satellites are opportunities for access to space, like ride shares, but they've also lowered the barrier to entry. Last year, the Department of Commerce Bureau of Economic Affairs released new experimental statistics on the U.S. space economy. They said 2018, almost $180 billion of gross product, 0.5% of the GDP, 41 billion of private industry compensation, and more than 356,000 private sector jobs. It's just an enormous impact on our economy today. I also found that the Moon to Mars Economic Impact Study, the agency generated over 64 billion in total economic output in fiscal year 2019, 312,000 jobs, 7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. So this is incredibly important to have the Department of Commerce looking at what space is contributing to our overall economy. The second thing I'd like to touch base on is just what are the policy issues. We have a very robust hearing agenda this year and next. And in no particular order, we want to have a robust civil space program. We want to do huge emphasis on STEM, education and careers. We know what we hear again and again and again is we can't find the young people with the science backgrounds, the curiosity, the education. Do a lot more to remove to get more diversity and remove the barriers to make sure that our space program and workforce involves all of America's talent. As we have known for a long time, people are born with a relatively narrow range of IQ. What happens after that is all up to us. Making sure that NASA has the infrastructure it needs. A lot of these infrastructure pieces are 40 years old. The maintenance backlog is estimated at $2.6 billion. We're trying to work closely right now with President Biden, with the Transportation Infrastructure Chair, Peter DeFazio, to make sure that as they move forward with an infrastructure plan, NASA is very much included. And then getting the humans back to the moon for the first time since 1972 and on to Mars is one of the most ambitious endeavors that we've ever undertaken. And we're going to try to make sure, stay very close to NASA to make sure that we're doing everything possible to make this happen. I'm really excited about Bill Nelson's nomination and likely confirmation this week or next. I think he'll be a great champion for this. Future of ISS is another important issue on the near horizon. The International Space Station has contributed so much to our understanding of our planet, of science, of ourselves, and we got to figure out what the effective transition is to the next space. And then space activities. We're going to be doing a lot of work on orbital debris and space traffic management. And then also looking at the ways the commercial sector can help on not just traffic management, space debris, but everything else that's going on. You know, one of the things in the next infrastructure plan is the notion that we will have broadband, high-speed broadband, affordable infrastructure, broadband to every American citizen. There's a significant number. I think 7% of Virginians have no broadband at all. A huge percent have access to only one broadband. And, you know, it's not inconceivable. It's very plausible that space will be a big part of delivering that broadband, especially to places like Appalachia. And then safety, of course. Let me end just by saying that space is our future. There's so much to be excited about. I just love being part of this. You know, during the pandemic, obviously we launched Perseverance, despite the pandemic. And then the Ingenuity helicopter's flown a couple of times now. That's just going up and down. It's going all around. We're going to complete work on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to take Hubbard and times 1,000 or more. The Nancy Grace Roman, what used to be called WFIRST, is still underway. It might be 2023, I think, when we'll be able to launch that. But that ability to look way, way, way back to the very beginning of this universe is incredibly exciting. We're having a hearing tomorrow on not just Perseverance, but also Mars sample return. The notion that, you know, in this decade, we can go to Mars, pick up rocks and bring them back and study them to see so much more about the composition of not just our solar system, but what that tells us about the possibilities for life on other planets. And then all that the commercial companies are doing. Virgin Orbit and SpaceX and our big guys like Lockheed. And, you know, it's really exciting to see how much is happening in this place, because space is the laboratory where we learn so much. This is where we've learned about and are learning about dark energy, dark matter, inflation theory, the multiverse or multiverses, and really the ultimate nature of reality, which hopefully will then lead us to some understanding of the meaning. And I think for me, most importantly, space is where we are going to answer the questions about the future of humanity. Where are we going? Yes, we have huge problems and opportunities here, but think how far we've come since in the last 116 years, since Einstein and Bern in 1905. It is a completely different world. In 1900 in the US, the average white man lived to be age 40. The average black man lived to be 30. And look at where we are right now. When I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the 1950s, there were a handful of democracies in the world, like under two hands. Every single Latin American country was run by a military dictatorship. Now, there are something like 80 democracies in the world. Some of them are flawed, some of them are fragile, but we're very much moving in the right direction. Some of the autocracies notwithstanding. So just think how far we will go in the next 116 years when we've solved the climate change problem, when we've made fusion energy real, which, by the way, is the holy grail for climate change, but also is how we get to not just other planets, but other star systems, where we've solved enormous advances in healthcare. Just what CRISPR is going to do right now for the genetic illnesses that we inherit. The evolution of governments, the democracies that will continue to grow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have to be thinking about not just about how we perfect life on this planet, how we form a more perfect union, but what we are doing with the only intelligent life that we know of in the universe. So I really look forward to using our little science space subcommittee to support American leadership in space science, discovery, innovation, exploration, and commercial space. And I'm thrilled that we will have the Washington Business Space Roundtable as a partner as we launch these many different initiatives. I urge you to tune in to our Space Subcommittee meeting tomorrow. I confess I don't know what the mechanism is, but there's got to be some way for you to be part of that through Zoom listening or C-SPAN or something. But it should be really interesting as we talk about perseverance and Mars sample return, and the many other really fascinating hearings we will have this year, including hopefully reauthorizing NASA. You know, it's been a couple of years since the reauthorization has taken place. It's past due, and moving forward too on issues like how we regulate the sensors from space, and what we do to get our brain pool, our national talent for NASA, as robust as possible. That's the longest speech I've given in years. I'm going to pause and turn it back over to Dan and try to handle any questions that you have. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Well, thank you, Congressman. You know, your words are inspiring, and it's an incredibly exciting time in space. The breadth of opportunities and potential issues are enormous. And so thank you ahead of time for all the hard work that I know that your staff and your colleagues will be doing. We have time for some questions, so I would encourage everybody online to put them on the chat so that I can call them up. And while you're doing that, I thought maybe I would throw out a question. Congressman, you mentioned space debris and SSA in your remarks, you know, and certainly humankind has a habit when we go to places of disturbing the environment of that area. And especially in the early days of space, you know, we didn't have the regulations on rocket bodies, on satellites, and there is work to be done in space. How do you feel about the United States and our role, the role that we should play in actively clearing debris, dangerous debris in space?
Oh, Dan, I think with the special caveat, dangerous debris, I think we absolutely have a leadership role there. And I'm really thrilled, and I don't mean for any of this to be partisan, but anytime our national leaders decide to pick up the mantle and say we're moving forward, it's a very good thing for the rest of the world. For example, Joe Biden just last week talking about 50 to 52% reduction in carbon emissions under 2005 levels by 2030. That's driving the rest of the world to try to do the same thing. I was on a call with some European parliamentarians at 9 o'clock this morning. They're like scrambling to make sure that they catch up with us. Or right now, our Department of Treasury has rolled out minimum taxation on foreign earnings for corporations. Expectation that we see and everybody but the tax havens will follow suit really quickly. So if we go up there and start to clean up our dangerous debris, we're not the only ones putting that up there. Hopefully the Chinese and the Russians and many others will do the same thing. And we will set the standard for what has to be managed.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We all have to play our part. Let's see, I'm going to read off the names of the people asking questions. And then if you would, when I read your name, just unmute and ask your question yourself. So the first question, pardon the glasses, is from Courtney Stad. Courtney, can you come on?
Sure. Mr. Chair, thank you so much. And I hate to be the carrier of bad news, but I just heard that the great Mike Collins, who, of course, was in the service module during Apollo 11, just passed away. I've just sent that text, so I think we all would agree, quite a historic figure. Mr. Chair, a couple of questions. One, your predecessor had complained that the previous NASA administrator had not provided your committee with detailed cost analysis regarding achieving the Artemis goal of landing by roughly 2024 or so. And I was curious whether you might have in mind a hearing to try to, once hopefully Mr. Nelson has confirmed it in place, to drill down to, in order to provide a level of confidence for you and your colleagues as to the resources required to achieve the goal. And my second question, speaking of hearings, there's so much activity going on in the defense world involving commercial space partnerships. Curious whether you might consider a hearing at some point about a whole of government approach in terms of how civil, military, and of course the commercial domains are working together. Thank you for your time, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney, very much. In defense of Jim Bridenstine, our former NASA administrator, I don't think he set the 2024 goal. I think that was our vice president who did that. And that Jim then and NASA were scrambling to try to make that real because the expectation was set by the White House. And that expectation, surprisingly, has not gone away. You saw nominee Senator Nelson last week say that when they awarded the human lander, the HLS, whatever, to SpaceX, in that press release was the notion that they're going to try to stay to the 2024 timetable if possible. So we're looking forward to, I know NASA is going through the whole process again, rethinking it. Yeah, it won't break my heart if it's not 2024. That always seemed to be a stretch to begin with. But we're eager to have them come back and say, here's what's plausible and here's the money that we need to make this happen. So I am very optimistic that our new NASA administrator and Steve Jurczyk and others will continue to work really closely with us to give us the data we need to provide appropriate oversight. And they're dependent on us to make sure that they have enough money. And I was thrilled to see, was it a $1.6 billion increase in the president's skinny budget for NASA? It was I may have my number, it might be 1.3 billion, but it's a lot of money, which is a good thing. And I apologize for the squeaky dog here.
Let's see, the next question.
But I'm sorry, Dan, one other second.
Go ahead.
Wait, in the penciled in is the hearing on the NASA timeline, Courtney, for June. It may be July, but it is coming up. And we'll be looking at the fall for doing something about whole of government. So thank you. Those are good suggestions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next question is from Victoria Sampson. Victoria?
Hello, thank you for taking my question, Congressman. I was very intrigued to hear you talk about the need eventually to cooperate and the benefits for cooperating with China in space. But as you know, there is not a prohibition, but I would say a speed bump in terms of the Wolf Amendment. And so I was curious to know if there is any interest within Congress or in your committee to modify it all to facilitate the eventual cooperation with, bilateral United States, China in space. Thank you.
Victoria, this may get me in trouble sometime because Frank Wolf I've known forever and like him and respect him, but I would love to be the sponsor of the repeal of the Wolf Amendment at a time when it's justified by what's happening internationally. It's the same with trade. China will soon have the largest economy. It's got 5 times as many people as we do. It's investing enormous amounts of money in research. Everyone says they're ahead of us on AI and on quantum. So I would much rather be partners with them. You compete where you have to and you partner where you can. But right now things are so difficult in terms of the human rights perspective. And in the trade too. I mean, we see them as cheating in almost every possible way in terms of the international trade regime. So at the moment, it's politically inconceivable and frankly unwise to reward that behavior by lifting the Wolf Amendment. But I do think we have to think middle term and long term and hope and pray that we move them towards a government, a regime that respects human rights, that plays by the rules of the game internationally, and that can then be a partner with us on the exciting ways we can advance science and humanity. So it may be 10 years from now, it may be 50 years from now. I don't know, but let's dream of the day when the Wolf Amendment is no longer relevant.
Thank you, Congressman. Let's see. The next question is from Marcia Smith. Marcia.
Thanks so much for taking my question. I was curious, now that private human spaceflight is really upon us after having been talked about and thought about for many, many years, is there any consideration for you to hold a hearing on the regulations for private human spaceflight and the informed consent regime, or do you think the regulations are appropriate today? And if you do have a hearing, will it be joint with House Transportation and Infrastructure, or are the two of you still sort of sorting out your jurisdictional boundaries?
Yes, still sorting out jurisdictional boundaries, but in a very friendly way. So there's no hostility there. And Marcia, at the moment, it's not on the list for this year, but only because we had to cram in everything we could. And we're still right now in a virtual context, but there's a long list for 2022, which does include consideration of, well, as you say, even things like liability concerns and what can you sign away and who's responsible if something goes wrong. And so, yes, and thanks for considering that we should do it with transportation and infrastructure. They're good people and it'd be fun to do it together.
Well, Congressman, your comments about China and potential collaboration is generating additional questions. So let's see, the next one is kind of a follow-on. Randy Lieberman.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for speaking today, and hope to see you at Nancy's on a Tuesday evening in the not too distant future. Yeah, follow on about China. It's amazing that beginning in the early to mid 70s, we developed this relationship with the Soviets and of course the Russians, which more or less continues to this day. There has to be a way of working with the Chinese, not rewarding them, but thinking in the long term. You're talking long term about humanity and space being part of it. So we have to use our way of thinking and their way of thinking, which clearly is different than ours. You're talking about trade, you're talking about domestic issues with the Uyghurs and such. But how do we get past this? and I'll follow up with you later on, but if you can just give us some of your personal insight of where you would like this to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy, very much. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the USSR and the Russian thing, because we had 10,000 nuclear weapons, each aimed at each other, and yet we were still able to participate in space. It would be terrific to find a way to move forward with China. I think one of the complications is that we also see space, and the whole debate over Huawei and 5G, as China's ability to get inside our systems and compromise them or destroy them or steal. They're famous for stealing intellectual property. Is how do we protect our intellectual property if we join with them in doing things that are so information content loaded, like space. But I do think that the first step is as much conversation, as much person-to-person diplomacy, and not just the diplomats, but the business people and the local political leaders and cultural leaders. We did amazing cultural exchanges with the Soviet Union all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, long before détente. And I think those set the stage for détente ultimately. And anyway, I know it's a little kumbaya, but the world's come a long way. You read, Factfulness, or listen to Bill Gates, or read Steven Pinker's book on the Enlightenment. We don't want to stop where we are right now.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question, Jeff Faust, you have a question.
Thank you, Dan. Question for the Congressman, going back to the human landing system announcement. Shortly after that was announced earlier this month, Chairwoman Johnson issued a statement expressing her disappointment with NASA's decision to move forward, given the fact that there was still acting leadership in place at the agency and without a firm plan about moving forward with the Artemis program. Do you share her concerns or any of the other issues that have been raised, including the protests that two of the companies have filed with the GAO over that procurement?
Jeff, it's always dangerous to disagree with your chairman. And I love Chairwoman Johnson. I was concerned when I read her letter, but then less concerned when Senator Nelson expressed his satisfaction with the process. If the gist of her complaint was that NASA, Steve Jurczyk and others didn't wait till Bill Nelson got there, but then Bill later said he's fine with the way the process went, then my concern is less. And then, of course, the protests, I expected them to come. They're a normal part of life in Washington. I can't comment on the quality of the protests, but the fact that there is protest is a completely legitimate part of what happens here. And as happens with defense protests all the time, that the authorities will sort through it and we will move on. Completely fair and completely normal.
Let's see, the next question is from Renee Leduc.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. I am pleased to be sitting inside of your district right now, and wanted to thank you for your great comments and enthusiasm, specifically for NOAA satellites and NASA Earth science. One of the major challenges facing some of these Earth science observations specifically are increasing conflicts related to spectrum, and particularly related to the deployment of 5G. What actions will the House Science Committee take on this, and how will you work specifically with the House Energy and Commerce Committee to find solutions that acknowledge the value of weather forecasting to the US and the world, especially given that the House Energy and Commerce Committee in the past has not been at all interested in speaking to the weather community?
Well, we need to encourage them to speak to the weather community. It's incredibly important. Renee, I had the incredible privilege, the dog learned how to get on the desk here, to chair Barack Obama, President-elect Obama's transition team at Commerce. Those 77 days between election and inauguration, 07 or 08, 09. That's when I learned to drink coffee, among other things. And the number one issue at NOAA, or at Commerce, number one, was the space satellites that had trouble getting up in the air. Because what happens if you didn't get them up there, if the old ones fell down without being replaced, the gap in our weather knowledge was explosive. And then its impact on business, GDP, families, et cetera, was just getting out of control. So big fan. I don't know that I'm sophisticated enough to understand all the spectrum issues, except they've been brought to my attention a number of times. And I don't think it's formally our jurisdiction, but we'll look to see how we can work with Energy and Commerce on that debate. And frankly, in medicine, the first rule is do no harm. I think that's got to be our first rule when it comes to spectrum, is make sure that the people that are using it productively for our society now are not hurt by future decisions in terms of spectrum reallocation.
Thank you.
What kind of dog do you have? I thought I heard you say you have a.
He's a very sweet
four-legged
habit
friend.
who wants to be with me 24 hours a day. So.
Yeah, it's one of the byproducts of virtual.
Yeah, and if it's Zoom, it means there must be squeaky toys. So, yeah.
Exactly. I think we're all getting to know each other's pets, and the pets are going to be very sad when virtual meetings end. Let's see. The next question, Georgette Alexander Morrison, you have a question. Let's see, are you able to unmute?
Sorry.
Maybe.
Thank you.
There you go.
Can you hear me
We
now?
hear you. Yes, we do.
And my dog is now barking. So, Congressman, I was just reading something in Space News, and they were talking about the Vice Chief of Space Operations for U.S. Space Force was saying that he felt that the work for a civilian agency should really be in charge of managing space traffic and space safe activities. So I was just curious if the House Energy or the House Space Committee was wondering about, was worrying about what type of agency or which agency would end up with this kind of work.
Yeah, it's certainly been part of discussion. I mean, the Pentagon, DoD obviously has had a role, or at least they put a lot of stuff into space. And now you have the Space Force, the Guardians, and then there's NASA. I think, I don't want to speak for Chairwoman Johnson or the whole committee, but my basic reading of the committee is that this is likely best a NASA responsibility. I've also not talked to the incoming, Bill Nelson to see what he thinks of that. I think we can manage it whatever way, but I'd much rather that it be one agency with a specific responsibility for it. And I'd rather it be NASA, because the militarization of space is something that should worry all of us.
That has come in from, let's see, here we go, that I can read. What do you see the role of small satellites for NASA's future science and exploration missions with this transformation in satellite technology?
I think really exciting. Every time I visit a high school, they show me the satellite that they're building, which is usually the size of a softball, or how exciting they can do. They just shoot up 100 at a time or 20 at a time. Yeah, it's the more information gathering pieces we have up there, as long as we can manage the safe space traffic, the more information that we have. I'm a huge fan of information theory and Shannon and all that, and so the more the better, and especially with our growing ability with AI and the new they don't even call them supercomputers anymore, right? There's a new, bigger, better name to manage all this data. It's very exciting. If young people ask me what to do, I'd say go become a data scientist.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that the first time I approached a piece of flight hardware that was going to fly in space, I had a special feeling inside, and I can only imagine, high school students, sophomores in college, and how they are developing with the ability to put things in space. There's a lot of discussion about infrastructure bills. How do you see space fitting into that? Do you consider that as part of infrastructure?
we very much want it to be part, yeah. And so we're, I guess, right now the subcommittee, which by the way is one of the things I love about the Science Committee and the Space Subcommittee in particular is it's been really bipartisan. In Capitol Hill that's very divided, we have a lot of good people on both sides. For example, I've got conversations with Brian Babin, who's the leading Republican on the Space Committee and chaired it in back when they were in charge a couple of years ago, and may do it again. So it's important to stay close to Brian and make sure that we're working in the right direction. So yeah, I think it's going to be very good, very much fun.
Let's see. The next question is from Will. Sorry, Congressman.
No, good. I'm sorry. Good.
Let's see. William Reddy has a question.
Yes, sir. I was really intrigued by your comment about fusion for in-space propulsion to explore beyond the moon. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Bill, are you the leader of the Challenger program?
I was, yes.
Okay, well, thank you for doing that too. That's very exciting. But back to all of our desperate need for the people that are interested and have that curiosity in it. So on fusion energy, I mean, the real driver in the short run is the best way to attack climate change. I mean, we're all fans of renewable power sources, and I heard John Kerry the other day say he thought we can meet 80% of our country's needs with renewables, but that was about the most optimistic that I had heard. And I'm excited about the electrification of automobility as a car dealer and all these other good stuff. But the panacea would be fusion energy, which all of my life has been 25 to 30 years away every year. And now the physicists at MIT and other places are saying, no, it could be 5 years. That's breakthroughs in so many other areas have led to ways that we can make fusion happen in the short run. National Academy of Sciences said we can have operational fusion plant commercial scale by 2035 to 2040 in this country. I've pulled together a bunch of bipartisan members of Congress to see if we can't make that this decade rather than the next decade. And with the 9+ commercial facilities around, Commonwealth Fusion, Massachusetts, TAA, and Seattle, et cetera. There are a lot of optimistic young men and women with beautiful educations and good minds trying to figure out how to make this. So, and just thinking about it as a former amateur diplomat, most tension in the world is the conflict for resources, the allocation of resources. And if you take energy, the scarcest of resource, and can make its raw product, its raw sources, seawater and rock, where we have many thousands of years of resource available for us. And the output is heat and a string of neutrons, and virtually no radioactive leftovers. We change the whole, we change poverty, we change climate, and then, full semicolon, Bill, and then we find a way to power ships from Moon or the Mars on the way to the outer planets, and maybe someday on the way to Alpha Centauri.
Well, thank you very much for your leadership on that.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Let's see, we have another question from Courtney Stodd. Courtney.
Mr. Chairman, a question, very much an inside the Beltway question, but the president's budget request, the expectation is that we may not see the detailed budget sometime in May. Some reports indicate June. And just curious about what impact that will have on your efforts to have a NASA authorization bill, and in terms of your colleagues on the appropriations side, to what extent that might impact the overall budget process this year. Thank you, sir, again.
Yeah, Courtney, really good question. And I failed to answer the second half of that question earlier. So on the Science Committee right now, we're working hard with NASA to get our requests into the infrastructure bill. Right now, the White House number is like 2.5 trillion. The Shelley Capito number is 600 billion on the bipartisan pushback. I don't know where it'll end up. certainly not 600 billion. It'll be much, much greater than that. So there's room in there for a significant NASA component that could be separate and prior to the NASA budget for the year. The NASA, the reauthorization and what's coming down from the president. In other words, it'd be great to have two bites at the apple. An infrastructure bite through the American Jobs Plan, and then the normal but good increase through the annual budget.
Congressman, that was our last question. Do you have any words that you'd like to share as we wrap up?
I'm so jealous of your jobs, your industry to take people and engineering to outer space and beyond, or not beyond, but it's I love the new responsibility I have. I look forward to all of you educating me about how to provide with others the leadership that we need to keep America the leader in space and drag the whole world along with us.
Well, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
It is an honor to host you this morning. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your words. We can see that you'll be busy as we go forward, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Dan.
And with that, let me hand it back over to Rob Shiga and the Business Roundtable.
Great. Thank you, Dan. So on behalf of WSBR, I'd like to thank everyone very much for joining today, and a special thank you to Congressman Beyer for his thoughtful remarks, and Dan Hart, along with everyone at Virgin Orbit, for sponsoring today's event. So just before we close out, we'd like to remind everyone to